Retired Navy Rear Admiral John Kirby joins me now, former White House National Security Communications Advisor under President Biden. John Kirby, welcome. It's good to have you with us today. Thank you. Good to see you again, sir.
Thanks, Martha. Thank you. Yeah, thanks. Good to be with you again, Martha.
It's good to have you. I heard you say earlier today that in one of your earliest missions as in the Navy, you were in the Strait of Hormuz, protecting it in the Reagan administration. When you look at how much the world has changed, you know, what can you bring to that experience and the questions that sit before us now as there are concerns about mining the Strait and shutting it down? What can you tell us?
Yeah. The thing that worries me the most right now, Martha, in terms of the Strait, remember the Strait of Hormuz is only 20 to 25 miles wide at the narrowest point. And there's about a 6-mile, what we call traffic separation scheme that kind of runs down the middle of it. So it's a narrow way in and out. It's a very, very dangerous choke point. But the thing that worries me the most right now are the drones. I'm not too much worried about the mine laying. You've seen that the CENTCOM has gone after their mine laying capabilities. They can't drop mines from the air. They can only do it from the sea, from surface vessels, and as your reporter just rightly noted, many of those surface vessels have been destroyed. And my sense is that Central Command has been focused on the Iranian Navy threat now quite intensively for the last few days. And I think that that will go on going forward. But it's the drones that can fly low and slow and are hard to detect that can actually help shut down traffic in the Strait itself. And that's a whole different level of complexity to go after because they have thousands and thousands of them. Convoy missions are possible. The U.S. Navy knows how to do it better than any other Navy in the world. And I did do it a long time ago, and our capabilities were different, but it can be done. It's labor intensive, Martha. It's resource intensive. It requires a lot of ships. It requires a lot of time. And I would hope that if the Trump administration goes down that route, that they are able to enlist the support of our partners and allied navies as well to help share some of that burden.
Yeah, you know, I've heard a lot of individuals, you know, Condoleezza Rice comes to mind, General Petraeus comes to mind, say that they think that that President Trump had a lot of guts to make this bold move and that it was the right thing to do to launch this attack in conjunction with Israel. Do you agree?
I think there's a lot of questions the American people are rightly asking about the why now and the impetus to go this. And I'm sorry that there wasn't more of a public debate and discussion about these decisions going forward. But you know what? We're in it now. And the military has been very consistent. Secretary Hegseth, the General Kane, Secretary Rubio, been very consistent about the limited objectives that they're going after. And now we're in it. And now I think it's really important that the nation unite behind the military and make sure that the military has the tools, the equipment, the weapons they need to accomplish these limited objectives and degrade Iran's military. And I think that's what we ought to be focused on.
So you think it was the right thing to do, or you don't think it was the right thing to do?
And what that looks like.
Do you think it was the right thing to do?
I wish we had more. I wish we had more of a public discussion and a debate about.
Well, do you think Khomeini would have stayed in his house or would have gone to that morning meeting that day if we had had a lot more discussion about it, John?
Look, Martha, nobody's in front of me in line and hating this regime and what they've done to the Iranian people or to our troops in the region or to their long history of supporting terrorism. I think the Iranian people deserve better. They deserve a government that is not a state sponsor of terrorism and that is not posing a threat to the United States and our interests around the world. But I think we need to be thinking about this. Exactly what we need to be thinking about is what post-conflict governance can possibly look like, because I don't see any indication that the regime is going anywhere anytime soon.
Well, you know, I think we're closer to that than we have been in a long time. We'll see if it actually happens. But I just want to go back because, you know, this is President Biden being asked about Iran and whether or not, you know, what he would say to them about pursuing nuclear weapons. And then we have President Obama right after that. We can play these back to back just to remind everybody where we've been on this issue in prior administrations. Watch.
I have one word: don't. Don't.
What is your message to Hezbollah and its backer, Iran?
Don't. You
know, when I think back to 2009, 2010, you guys will recall there was a big debate inside the White House about whether I should publicly affirm what was going on with the Green Movement. There was some thought that we were somehow going to be undermining their street cred in Iran if I supported what they were doing. And in retrospect, I think that was a mistake.
You know, over that period, we saw them build up a lot of their capability. A lot of that capability was taken out with the June attacks, but they never stopped working towards uranium enrichment at weapons grades levels. And in fact, under the Biden administration, John, you and I talked about this at the time, there was a hostage for hostage swap, and they had $6 billion released. And when we talked about it, you said, you know, that it was going to be used for humanitarian purposes in Iran. And all I can think about when I think about that is the food, the energy. There's no water in Iran. And then they slaughtered 30,000 people in the streets. What are your thoughts as you look back on all of that now, John?
Look, again, I'm not going to defend the Iranian regime at all. I mean, as I said, I started my naval career trying to make sure that the Strait of Hormuz was safe from Iranian mines and Iranian missile threats. I'm well aware of the threat that they have continued to pose, and I'm well aware of the struggles that presidents, both Democrats and Republicans, including President Trump and his first administration, dealt with when it came to Iran. When we left office, Iran was a weaker state than when we came into office because of the support we gave to Israel and the defense of Israel by President Biden against Iranian attacks and attacks from Iranian proxies like the Houthis and Hezbollah and Hamas. So they were much weaker, and they lost Bashar al-Assad on President Biden's watch as another proxy state in support. So they were weakened over time. And on the Iran nuclear deal, I mean, page 1 of that nuclear deal says Iran can never achieve a nuclear weapon, and President Obama tried to solve that problem diplomatically. They were in compliance when Obama left office, and Trump tore the plan up. And so, of course, the Iranians went back to enriching uranium. It is a problem that has bedeviled multiple administrations. And I don't think any one administration had a silver bullet to solve it. Now we're at war, and we need to see whether, as I said, we got to make sure that the military has what it needs to succeed. We'll see whether this leads to a better outcome for the Iranian people. And I am absolutely hopeful that that is the result, that whatever comes next, the Iranian people can live in peace and security, and Iran can be a responsible nation, and not only in the Middle East, but around the world. But we have to wait and see. I read a stat the other day, Martha, 4 out of 5 authoritarian regimes that are toppled, again, top down, end up in more authoritarian regimes and not necessarily anything that is supported from the bottom up. So the history's not really on our side here.
Well, we
but
hear
that doesn't mean
it's difficult business. There's no doubt about it. But I think the point made is that you can talk about it and process it to death over decades, and you don't get any actual change, or you can take some bold action, which is what we've seen. We don't know what the outcome is, but there are very different ways of approaching it.
No, but
go ahead. And then I do have one more question for you, but go ahead.
I don't think it's that. I just don't think it's fair to say that President Obama or President Trump in his first administration or President Biden just talked and did nothing. All 3 presidents dealt with this challenge. They did it in different ways. They added sanctions. We added sanctions to the Trump sanctions. They all tried to solve this problem diplomatically and economically. Now, President Trump has decided to solve it, or to try to solve it militarily. We'll see where it goes.
We saw, increased enrichment of uranium during that period. Billions and billions of dollars went into it, and we also saw the deterioration of the ability to, live a normal life of the people in Iran. One last question. We watched as millions of people crossed the border during the Biden administration, and now what we're hearing every day is fear that among them were sleeper cells who may now act in this country as a result of the ongoing conflict. Anything that should have been done differently in the prior administration, now that that is a reality on the ground here that we need to play whack-a-mole with in a big way right now?
Well, I mean, I wasn't an expert on the immigration situation when I was at the National Security Council. We worked very hard to try to get immigration reform in a bipartisan way. Obviously, that did not work its way through. I think it's important that the Department of Homeland Security and our intelligence communities, and certainly federal, local, and state law enforcement have the tools that they need and the resources to make sure we're rooting out this problem. There's no question that, certainly in wake of the attacks on Iran, that we've got to focus very keenly on the potential for terrorist attacks here at home. And we need to make sure that across the government, everybody's working together to that end to try to protect the American people from any fallout or follow-on attacks that could happen as a result of being inspired by what's happening in Iran.
Lots of things on the burners on all fronts here at home and abroad. John Kirby, I thank you, as always, for coming here and having the conversation with us. And it's always good to see you. Welcome back. Thank you, John.
You too, Martha. Thanks.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.